Hi there, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Karen Fabian, and I'm so glad you're here. I know you've got limited time, so thanks for spending some of it with me. Whether you're a brand new yoga teacher, currently in training, or you've been teaching for years, this podcast is for you. My goal is to help you feel like teaching can be easy, fun, and a natural extension of who you are, rather than something you have to do the right way, whatever that is, or something that feels like you have to work hard at it all the time. This isn't a podcast where I'll be telling you what to do or critiquing your teaching. Instead, I'll share frameworks, skills, and techniques you can experiment with to see what works for you, especially when it comes to understanding anatomy, cueing, and sequencing. I'll share ideas that may challenge what you believe about what it takes to be a yoga teacher. All I ask is that you keep an open mind, because some of what I share may sound different from what you've heard. We'll also talk about the mindset of a confident teacher, not only because it's such a big part of empowered teaching, but because it's rarely discussed. With that, welcome, and let's get into today's conversation. Okay. Hi, Lauren. It is so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me here on my podcast.
Hi, Karen. So nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Well, I'm really glad that we had this chance to get together. And, for the person listening out there, I want to just give a little backstory of how we landed here. You and I recently had a conversation where you were sharing just a really great experience you had teaching. And after we hung up the phone or ended our call, I thought that would be a really great story for other yoga teachers to hear, because a lot of what I hear is the frustration that teachers have, or that desire to feel a certain way when they're teaching. And a lot of what you shared was, of course, authentic to you, but I think there were, on a high level, just some common threads that I thought we could really pull a little bit more so that other people could hear a little bit about you, your story, and maybe they'll find some inspiration in it. So that's kind of the background. So having said that, I want to start out by asking you to just share a little bit about your backstory and how you ended up teaching yoga.
Yeah. So I've been practicing yoga for probably about 10 years or so now. I really got into it more because I danced growing up. And so I like the movement aspect, the asana, learning about the poses. And then a few years ago, during one of my corporate jobs, I actually volunteer taught at my corporate job. And a lot of people like coming to classes. And so I thought, this might be a good idea to become a yoga teacher one day. And I always had it in the back of my mind, but the timing just never worked out. A lot of the trainings typically go from January through May, and they're on weekends. And I have a little one at home now. So it just made it a little bit more difficult. But then when I started practicing more last year in 2025, Cleveland Yoga, where I got certified and where I practice, they had posted an ad for a 200-hour summer immersion program. And I thought this would be awesome. I can do this in a couple weeks, get my certification, and start teaching. And going into it, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, if I wanted to teach at a studio, if I wanted to do privates. And still, fast forward to July 2026, I still have some ideas of what I want to do. But I went into the training kind of open-minded. And then I went through my 200-hour training. I did that July of 2025. I finished up in October of 2025, and I immediately started teaching. I reached out to a studio close by, Flow in Cleveland, and I started teaching there in December, because I figured if I didn't start teaching, I was going to forget everything and it would be harder to get back into it. And so I took the opportunity to begin teaching. I wanted to stay fresh with everything that I just learned in my 200-hour training. And so I jumped right into it. I will say that and still to this day, 6 months later, 7 months later, I'm still very nervous, which I think is probably a normal thing. And it's common probably for you as well. But yeah, I started teaching and I started teaching one class and I was really inspired, I think, also by some of the teachers' classes that I take. I thought it would be awesome to be able to teach a class to someone in a group of people. Like, I'm very passionate about yoga, and so I wanted to be able to share that with other people. The not only the physical aspect of it that got me into it, but I think the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, it all, to me, that's yoga, and I wanted to be able to share that with others. So that's kind of what got me into it and where I'm at now.
Got it. So one of the things you said, I want to pick up on and just go into that a little bit more because I think this is also something else that I hear a lot. Before you started teaching, and maybe even a little after, what was it that you were the most nervous about?
Just being in front of the room, in front of others, and being afraid that I was going to mess up. There's a lot of pressure, and you don't realize that being on the other end as a student. A lot of yoga teachers just make it seem so easy and it just flows. And the class, I always attend really great classes, and so I never thought it would be that difficult. And then I got up there to teach my first class and was like, oh my goodness, this is a lot harder than I expected. There's a lot of pressure to deliver a quote unquote good class or good enough class to students. Students are, I think what changes is you're teaching a class that people are paying for. And so that kind of changes the dynamic as well. And it makes it seem like, well, someone's paying for this, so I need to make sure I deliver a class worthy of their time and their money. So I think it was just the pressure of being up there and delivering something that, hitting a certain expectation, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And before you started teaching, did you expect that when you did teach, it would feel like pressure, or did you have a different expectation?
No, honestly, I thought it was going to be easier
Okay.
to get up there and teach because, being a student, I know the practice. I know all of the poses. I've learned them over the course of, like I mentioned, I've been practicing for at least 10 years now. So I knew all the poses. And so I thought, this would be easy to get up there and just teach the poses. Well,
Mhm.
it wasn't until I went through my 200-hour teacher training that I realized teaching is more than just naming a pose. You're
Right.
really, you're talking to anatomy, you're talking to somatics and alignment and the emotional and spiritual side of the practice. And so a lot more goes into it than just saying a pose. And you really have to, teach people how to get into that pose. What might they be feeling when they're in that pose? And so that aspect of it was definitely a lot more eye opening once I got up in front of the room and thought, oh man, this is a big responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. So in your first year or so of teaching, when you started to feel this way, were there some things that you started to do to try to manage that feeling of nervousness?
Yes. So, one of the first things that I did was, well, I did a couple things. So I started trying to teach as much as I could. So beyond just becoming a instructor at a studio, I also, before that, I actually was helping out at a local school to get experience. So it was unpaid, but I wanted to get as much experience as possible. But in addition to that, one of the biggest things, and I have to give you a huge shout out to this, Karen. I enrolled in your anatomy accelerator program. And so that helped me because initially I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to, like I mentioned, the biggest part was how am I going to cue people? And besides just saying, get into warrior one, get into warrior two, I have to actually not just, I think there's something to differentiate here. It's not just you're not just educating, you're instructing. You're getting up there and you're instructing someone how to get into a pose. That's a big responsibility. And so I thought, how can I better deliver cues to people? And I came across your program and I enrolled. It was about a month long, and I still have lifetime access to go back and continue my education and brush up on certain things that maybe I need more help with. But I enrolled in your program, and it really helped me understand anatomy. And
Mm.
I've always been, anatomy was something I remember taking an anatomy class in high school, and I loved it, but it was also overwhelming. I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not, how am I going to learn all of the muscles and the bones and the joints and the movements? And it was a lot. And so I think, initially when I started getting into teaching yoga and I wanted to try to understand how am I going to be able to deliver better cues, the first thing that came to mind was anatomy. It was,
Mhm.
well, I need to understand anatomy, and this is a practice of movement. And so, like I
Mhm.
mentioned, I found you and came across your program, and it really helped me to break down and understand anatomy for yoga teachers. And I think that's the key differentiator here, is that you can go out and you can buy anatomy books and you can try to learn things online. But what's most important is that you frame it specifically to anatomy for yoga teachers. And
Mhm.
so I think the way that you break it down in your 10-step blueprint helps it's easier to digest and
Mhm.
understand in the lens of an anatomy, I'm sorry, in the lens of a yoga teacher. And
Mhm.
so you really make it simple and easy to learn and to be able to apply it as well. So I think having gone through your program, that helped build a lot of confidence.
Mhm.
And taking it a step further, I know we didn't get to this in our conversation yet, but I actually, and maybe I might be getting a little ahead of myself,
Okay.
but I actually enrolled in a 300-hour program now.
Mhm.
And I also did that through Cleveland Yoga. So I wanted to get deeper into my knowledge and experience of yoga. So, and I can talk a little bit more about that. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because one of the exercises in our program was to take a pose. I was assigned actually two different poses. I was assigned eagle pose and balancing half moon. And I
Mhm.
was to break down that pose from the anatomy lens, but also, building on to certain things that we learned in our 300-hour program, like the chakras and not just anatomy, it was chakras, anatomy. It was also um, alignment and the spiritual aspect of the pose, which you might be feeling, the purpose of the pose. And so I was assigned this, and I really had to look at each pose and break it down. And I think having gone through your program, it helped me understand the anatomy of the pose, like where the muscle was, the key joints and the key movements in the pose. And it helped me feel more confident in my teaching. So now, after gone through that exercise, I now go through my classes and can speak specifically to those two poses really well, because I understand the anatomy of those poses, and I want to be able to
Mhm.
work with you even further to understand and take some of your workshops to be able to understand, like, okay, I maybe understand eagle pose and balancing half moon, but now in warrior one and in warrior two and some other poses in triangle, I want to be able to speak a little bit more to anatomy and to other things like chakras and alignment. So yeah, I'll pause there because I know that was a lot, but that's kind of,
Yeah, no, I
yeah,
think it's great. And I think what you described is having a template way to look at a pose.
yeah.
And it's not just through the lens of anatomy, it also adds these other things, which I love that you brought up because sometimes people hear the anatomy conversation and they say, well, I don't really like to speak to anatomy. I like to speak to chakras or somatics. And it's, just a way to look at a pose and sort of acknowledge there is, of course, like you said, that movement piece, and to be able to understand that gives you a tremendous leg up in terms of feeling confident, which is what you shared. So
Yeah.
that is fantastic. I love everything that you shared there. Um, so I think, the like I said in the beginning, the thing that sparked my interest in having you on the show was a recent conversation we had when you talked about a new class on your schedule. And I think
Yes.
one of the things about what you shared that I thought was just so inspiring was that you needed to sort of have, and this was my interpretation, and I don't know if I even said it this way to you when we talked before, but my sort of assessment of hearing you was that you really leaned into trusting yourself, that you could teach this particular type of class because it wasn't an exact match to the type of class that you were teaching. So, why don't you just tell the listener a little bit about what this new experience was, this new opportunity, how it was a little bit different, and how you needed to lean into trusting yourself in order to say yes to this opportunity. And then, of course, you can go into what happened when you taught your first class of this new opportunity.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to audition for a studio that a highly desirable studio, which is also Cleveland Yoga, where I did my 200-hour and now my 300-hour teaching. And there was a position for a slow flow opening. And so I put my name in the hat, just figuring, hey, it'd be a good opportunity. It would help me expand and get better as a teacher, become more well-rounded, because I had only ever taught power vinyasa. So I was taught in the Baptiste methodology. And if you know Baptiste, there's JIP, which is Journey into Power, and that's typically a power vinyasa flow. So that's all that I really knew. But I wanted to, like I said, expand myself and my reach as a teacher. And so the opportunity presented itself. I auditioned, and to my surprise, I was offered the role. I was very excited. I really didn't think I was going to get it, just because I figured, you know what, I'm still newer into my teaching. They probably want someone with a little bit more experience. And someone with more experience teaching slow flow. But for those out there that may also be going through a similar experience, slow flow doesn't necessarily mean easy. So that was one thing that, in my mind, having only taught power vinyasa, I figured, oh, all I know is, power and hardcore and go fast and get the heartbeat up.
Mhm.
And I'm like, how am I supposed to teach a slow flow class? And then after talking to you and a couple other teachers, they mentioned, like, look, you can still teach JIP, just slow it down. It doesn't necessarily mean taking out poses or whatnot. It's just being more intentional. And so that helped me prepare for my first class. And once I got the position and I taught my first class there a couple weeks ago, I was, of course, very nervous to teach, because I'm like, wow, these students, the classes are really full. And so I'm like, I'm going to go from teaching a handful of students to a room full of students, which, it doesn't make a difference to me, having 2 students versus having 10 students. They're students. I'm just grateful to be there teaching in front of one person. So that really doesn't matter, but it does make me a little bit more nervous when there's more people. It just means more eyes on you. So I got up there and I was all nervous. I got up there and taught, and the class was actually waitlisted, which doesn't typically happen. So there was 17 people in the class. There were 4 Zoomers, and I only knew one person in the class. So I was like, oh my goodness, the nerves were just flowing through me at the beginning of class. But what I did, and what I did differently, is I took a moment, not just for the class, but for myself at the beginning, to thank everyone for being there. I was, grateful for the opportunity to be able to instruct them and to be up there. It was an honor and a pleasure of mine to be able to do that. And I took them through a slow meditation. So that's not something I typically do in my power classes, but I started with a meditation to kind of level set. Also, like I said, for myself to kind of catch my breath. And I took them through the flow. And honestly, Karen, it was one of the best, it was probably the best teaching experience that I've had so far in the past 6 or 7 months. And I could say that's probably because a number of things. I think besides just, the music and the people being there, it was just the energy in the room. It was the energy that I brought. I was prepared. I was excited and enthusiastic to be there. The nerves. So typically I go in, like I said, and I'm super nervous, which I was, but a lot of times, which I didn't mention, is that sometimes I dread teaching. And I say that because to share with other listeners that it's okay to have that feeling. I go in sometimes and I dread it. And I'm open about that with people that I talk to because, and it's not dread necessarily in a negative way, but I think it's because I'm nervous and I'm scared of what other people are going to think of me. And are students going to be happy with my class? Are they going to get are their expectations going to be met? So all of these things lead to this feeling, this dreadful feeling sometimes of being scared to go in there and teach. And so leading up to this class, I had similar feelings, but then this class was sort of like the light bulb that went off and that switched because the welcoming energy that everyone had for me in the room. It was a beautiful Sunday morning and the sun was shining. And so the class that I delivered, I was able to, slow down my teaching. I was really able to connect with my students. I was able to hold them in poses longer with slow flow and be more intentional. And I think I was meant to teach slow flow. And I say that because, afterwards in my last class, my husband actually came to my class and he told me it was the best class that he's ever taken. And he said, Lauren, your teaching has skyrocketed. You've really leveled up your teaching. And I could see that so much in this slow flow class that you taught. So I bring that up and I share this story because I think it's helpful for other people to know a couple of things that it's okay, one, to have that feeling of fear and dread because that's natural. You can't really control that. But what you can control is once you get up there, the type of class that you offer to your students. So your confidence up in the front of the room, the nurturing person that you are, you bring out your personality, just be yourself up there. And people your authenticity really shines through. And I think that's what really differentiated my class on Sunday than from classes that I've taught in the past is that I was authentic up there. I was real. I was excited. And what also I want to mention that you shared with me is that you told me to think about how I felt after that class. And you told me that that feeling is what truly describes, how well your class went. It's not the feedback necessarily that anyone shares with you that you get. It's the feeling that you get after you teach the class. And that really is that's more telling than anything else. And so I'm just so proud and honored to, be on the schedule teaching that class. And like I said at the beginning, it really has expanded my reach now for being a yoga teacher. It's added more tools into my toolkit. And now, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I do have aspirations to teach other classes at the studio, like a power sculpt class and maybe yin yoga, because I'm going to be certified in that soon. But yeah, this this is such a good opportunity. And I hope this inspires other people to go out there and teach classes that maybe they thought that they weren't capable of.
Yeah, I think that was such a cool revelation for you that you applied to teach this class. It was a little out of your area of expertise, but you did it anyway. So I want to just acknowledge you and just remind the person listening, you can do that too, right? You can have faith in yourself even when you're not exactly sure how it's going to turn out. So kudos to you for doing that. I think the other thing that I found interesting in hearing you describe this, and I want to call this out as well, especially for people listening, is when you earlier said you felt the pressure. So, pressure, when somebody says to me, when a yoga teacher says to me that word, I can make some assumptions about what their perceptions are about what they're going to be offering when they go in and teach a class. So if a teacher says to me, I feel pressure, in my head, I hear that as, okay, this is someone who has really high expectations for themselves. They really want to do it right. They have this thought process that, not so much that there's a right, wrong, but that there's a demand for this. You mentioned the money, like people are paying for this, and all of those sorts of things can lead to feeling pressure. So I want to just, when you mentioned in this part of the conversation, dread, I want to just add that when you feel that pressure, and it's not just you, this is super common, it can feel like dread. But, and what it really is connected to is that feeling of these people are expecting this expectation, and the bar now is super high. But the thing that you said that really stuck out to me, and again, I want to say this for people listening so they can not just hear your story and think, oh, well, that worked great for Lauren. That's never going to happen to me. You said something, and I don't even know if you remember saying this, but you said something along the lines of, I knew what my sequence was going to be. I knew what my cues were going to, I felt prepared, I think is the word you used.
Yes, yes.
And the reason that to me is so powerful in you being able to transform as you did is because you took responsibility for the things you can control and you left the other things to them. So you went in there saying, I can't control what they think of this class. I don't know if you consciously did this, but by you controlling, I know my sequence well, I know the cues I'm going to use, I understand movement, I'm going to be watching them, anything that's within your purview. You released that pressure and gave back to the people in the class, you guys can't control this stuff. This is on me, and I got this. You guys think whatever you want, do what, whatever this, however this lands on you is your decision, not mine. And that shift in your mind, that mindset shift, is what can release that pressure valve so that you can. And this is why it's also interesting to me that your husband had that feedback for you, because who better to know the real Lauren than him? And in my estimation, his comment to you about, Lauren, that was the best class you ever taught, was probably more about how you carried yourself versus what you taught. And so this is a sort of thing that only a loved one can really perceive. When they're taking your class, they're perceiving, even though you're not having a conversation with them, you're just teaching them a class, they're feeling and hearing the real you through the template of teaching a class versus someone who's trying to be like somebody else or is really super nervous. They're perceiving their loved one as that's not really Lauren. And so I think that comment from him really showed that you were able to be comfortable. Plus, you did that centering exercise. And I also want to call that out because somewhere in the back of your mind in the beginning of the class, something told you, I need to take care of myself right now so I can be here for them. So I'm going to do something that helps me and is helpful to them. And I think that is also a decision that oftentimes teachers don't make because they think, I can't take care of myself because I'm here for them. I'm 100% supposed to be here for them. But there's a lot of different things like what you did, like holding people longer in a pose and just breathing along with them, like just giving them a few minutes in silence where you can feel your feet on the floor. These are all nervous system down regulation sort of techniques that a teacher can use to get the nerves down, to feel a little more centered, and then pick it up from there. So I want to just acknowledge that you did that, and that was also a really good thing. So I'm curious, did anything that I say just now, did that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, it all resonated with me. I think the first thing is being prepared.
Yep.
So one thing that you talk about often is, your signature sequence. And I think I have a signature sequence. I definitely, being Baptiste trained, I stick to JIP. And I've had conversations with a lot of teachers about this and gotten a lot of opinions. And I think just sticking to that, being a newer teacher, I've been doing JIP in every single one of my classes now since I started in December. So, and I'm going to stick with it. A teacher told me one time, do it for the first year if you need to. Because really, when you stick to a signature sequence, as you've mentioned before, Karen, that you're not distracted by everything else, what comes next, losing your train of thought. You're really focusing on your students and being able to give better cues because you can actually walk around the room and see what they're doing. And so that's one key tip that I think has led to the experience that I had, the wonderful experience, teaching my first slow flow class, is that I offered the JIP series. I'd made some modifications just because of timing and because it's more slow flow. So I took out some chaturangas so it wasn't as powerful, but I offered the opportunity for people to do that. I offered modifications, but what I did was, like you said, I came prepared. So I wasn't in my head so much. I was up there being able to deliver a class that the students signed up for. So they wanted slow flow, and I was able to offer them a slow flow class. So I think being prepared is definitely one of the biggest things. And then also the nervous system regulation, like you said, I was able to get up there, take a deep breath at the beginning. And then I think that's also another reason why I like teaching the slow flow, is because I can hold the students in poses a little bit longer, and it helps me reconnect and it helps me just, let's take a breath. And if I do want to think about, okay, what do I need to do next? I have a moment to kind of think about that. So that's another thing. And I would say lastly, my husband mentioning that that was the best class that I've delivered so far. I think that that's come with time. It's come with practice, but it's also, consistency and showing up. I've continued to show up week after week for my students. And not only that, but I have to give a lot of credit to my 300-hour training. I mentioned that in the beginning of class, I decided to do my 300-hour training shortly after my 200-hour, which, some people have mixed opinions about. I've heard some opinions of, well, wait until, you've been teaching for a while and then maybe go back and do a 300-hour, kind of like I got the same opinion whenever I was looking at doing my master's. And so what I did was I decided to jump right into it because I wanted to continue my education. I wanted to become a stronger, better teacher, and not necessarily, more hours doesn't necessarily equate to being a better teacher. But the way I think of it is it helped me show up better for my students, being more educated and learning more about pranayama and the asanas and the chakras and anatomy, just getting a deeper understanding could help me build confidence. That's my own personal opinion. And I'm so glad that I went through with my 300-hour. And I think that's helped me build so much confidence along the way. And I started that back in February, and it goes until October of this year. And each class that we have each weekend, we're building on things that we already know. And like I said, that exercise that I was given to have to break down the poses and talk to the anatomy and the bandhas and the chakras and the alignment and the somatics, just looking at it holistically like that has helped me be able to be a better teacher and build more confidence and be able to get up there in front of my students and really teach a class that I'm proud about and happy about and I'm proud of. So I'm just I'm still on cloud nine from that class that I taught. I was smiling ear to ear that day, and it was just such a good feeling. And I hope to continue showing up for my students and having that feeling each week, because that's why I do it. It feels good. I had students come up to me afterwards and they gave me a hug, and students came back to the next class, and it made me feel really good and made me want to keep showing up for my students each week.
That's great. Yeah. And I want to just pull out one particular thing you said, because I want to make sure people hear it in a way that I think is more powerful than maybe just at face value. When you talked about being prepared as part of the piece where you were talking about using a signature sequence, I want to just call out how those two things work together in a unique way, because a lot of yoga teachers think being prepared means every week spending 3 hours at their desk creating a new sequence, practicing it at home like 10 to 20 times, and bringing into the room notes. Like, preparation for a lot of yoga teachers looks like that. And so when you said preparation, I want to just call out that you were saying it within the context of having a conversation about using pretty much the same sequence
Yes.
over and over again. And the preparation there comes in using that over and over. So you build the competency and the familiarity around the sequence. And therefore, you don't have to think about it as much. And so, preparation in that context is really moving on a continuum from sort of conscious incompetence, like I'm aware, I don't really know what's next in the sequence, to moving along this continuum where you're unconsciously competent. You're not even thinking about the sequence when you're teaching it. So, preparation in the context of your approach is leaning into teaching that same sequence over and over again. And so I just want you to speak to, and I'm keeping my eye on the time here, I just want you to speak to really briefly about, because a lot of teachers are going to hear this and they're going to say, well, I can't teach the same sequence from class to class because I'm really worried people are not going to want that. They're going to want something new and exciting. And every time I go on Instagram, I see new and exciting stuff, and I'm triggered to, well, maybe I should be doing that in my classes. Now, I know, because I have Baptiste training too, I know that the philosophy when you're trained in the Baptiste methodology is built upon using the Journey into Power sequence. So that's sort of the culture. But even with that, you're still aware, of course, when you go to other people's classes, you get other ideas. So how do you personally handle that particular belief in a way that you're able to know that intellectually that belief is out there and still teach your signature sequence? How do you do that?
Great question. I think that I too was like a lot of yoga teachers out there that assumed I can't teach the same thing over again. People are going to get bored. They're not going to come back to my class. But I can personally attest to the fact that it's okay that you teach the same thing over and over again, because I have one student in my class that has been coming back for the past 4 or 5 months. Every single week, she has not missed a class. And to me, I'm like, well, if she was bored, she wouldn't come back. And she continues to show up week after week. And so that alone tells me that it's okay. But also, I honestly think what made me feel that it was okay as well is that I had besides you sharing it too in your podcast, I had someone that I look up to and value their opinion, a seasoned professional in the yoga industry, tell me, and I mentioned this, I think earlier, that she said, if you teach that same sequence for the first year, that's okay. And hearing those words come from her really told me that, okay, I guess it gave me permission. And I don't know, maybe I'm not saying you necessarily need permission from someone, but I personally did. I needed to hear those words. And once I did, I've been teaching the same sequence over and over, and I will continue to teach that sequence. Now, I vary it up a little bit. I mean, I throw in a couple things here and there just to mix it up, but I keep that same framework, and it's allowed me to truly be a better teacher because I can focus on my students. I can really connect with my students. I can talk to them. I can make eye contact with them. I can watch what they're doing and offer cues based on what I see because I'm not in my head thinking about what comes next. I truly am present in the moment in the class. And I do think that that has so much to do with why I've been having such great classes lately, is because I'm not worried about what's coming next. I'm teaching the same thing over and over again. And like I said, initially I thought that that was a problem too, but I'm going to keep doing it and people continue to come to my classes. So, so yeah, I think for all the teachers out there that kind of have that same thought, is that it's okay. I'm giving you that permission that someone gave me. And maybe that'll stick for you, is that it's okay to teach the same sequence for the first year, even beyond. And no one is here to tell you that you can't do that. And to tell you how long you can or can't teach that same sequence. Like, do it for as long as you need, as long as you feel comfortable, until you can feel that you're confident enough to change it up. It's okay. So I just want to share that with everyone.
That's the key. It's like whether it's a year, 10 years, whatever it
Yeah,
is,
doesn't matter.
it's about when you as the teacher feel like I'm not thinking about the sequence so much when I go in. I
Yeah,
can really, all the things that you just said, I can really see the students. I feel more present. Like all of those things are more of when you're done teaching your class, in asking yourself, like you said earlier, how do I feel about the class I just taught? And really hearing that feedback from your own intuition as the barometer of how am I doing versus what people are saying. And the other thing I want to just call out, when you talked about permission, this is part of the problem in the yoga world, that teachers have this perception that they need permission, not just to teach the same sequence when they intellectually know it would be so much better for me if I just kept teaching the same sequence, but they question that because they feel like they can't without permission. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that falls into that bucket. So I want to just call out that something in you, that sense of, I know where I want to be as a teacher. I know how I want to feel. And I know that this will help me get there. That desire to shift to that more desirable way of teaching overrode that. And plus, speaking to that person who said, you can do this, gave you that extra oomph, but there was also that desire inside you. I really wanted to feel more comfortable and confident teaching, that I would imagine helped you move forward, even though maybe in the back of your mind you were thinking, I'm not sure this is going to be received well. And it's so interesting because we're talking about Baptiste. I mean, Baron's been teaching for 40 years, the same sequence, right? Bikram forever, the same sequence, an entire methodology, an entire empire. I don't want to necessarily say empire, but an entire business built on the same 26 poses in a row, the same way when there were franchises globally. So we have hardcore evidence that there are plenty of people who, and it's not just those two, there are others that teach the same sequence all the time. That is their method. And yet this other mindset is out there. And I think it's just because people tend to think novelty is better than regularity. But like you said, you can tweak a couple things. And ultimately, the most important thing is what you said earlier, that you feel prepared, that the teacher feels prepared. nothing can happen well if the teacher doesn't feel prepared because they're the teacher, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important point to call out. So I love that you brought that up. So the final question I want to kind of set you up to answer is if someone's listening to this and they're feeling a little bit on the fence about, am I really the right kind of person to be teaching? Like maybe they are feeling that dread. What is something that you could say to them to maybe buoy their spirits? Is there something from your own experience that you've been going through over the past couple of months that you could say to somebody? Like imagine if you were sitting in Starbucks with a teacher who had just started and they were just feeling like, oh, there's just so many things that I'm thinking about that I feel like I'm in charge of, and I feel that pressure. Is there something you could share with them that might help?
Two things come to mind. The first thing I would say is if you're hesitant at all, lean in.
Mhm.
That was one thing, like I mentioned earlier on in our conversation, is that I was also on the fence. Like, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? Where do I want to teach? How many days a week do I want to teach? In what capacity? And the biggest thing for me was if I don't do this, I'm never going to do it. I'm going to continue to put it off and I'm going to then forget and not going to be as polished. And so I leaned into the discomfort and continued to lean into it and decided I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to reach out to a studio. I'm going to put my name out there and myself out. And that's a whole separate conversation is, how to, because that's something that could come up. Well, I don't know how to find a job when I first start. So that's something, I'm sure you could talk about, Karen, or you probably have, but and I know you have a book out there as well that I've read that kind of helped me figure out, well, how am I supposed to get my first job? So definitely lean in and go and audition at places, even though it's really uncomfortable. Like me, you never know. And I auditioned with, I forget, I think there was 14 other people, and I never thought in a million years that I was going to be the one that was selected. And I was. And so I would say, like I said, lean into that discomfort, put yourself out there. Definitely, go to places, audition, and you might not get picked, and that's okay. That's not the right studio for you then, or it's not the right time. Like right now, maybe you try again later next year once you get more experience, but just go out there and get experience. The second thing that I want to leave everyone with is that just be you. So the class that I took over for, the slow flow class, was it was a older man who was teaching the class. He had been there for 10 years. And so students were expecting, I'm sure, a certain type of class. And maybe they weren't expecting it. Maybe that's why they came to my classes, because they wanted something different. But, my initial thought or thinking right now is that there are so many different types of teachers out there. And even the studio that I practice at, there are, I don't know, there's 15 teachers and everyone is so unique, but they have people that continue to show up to their classes week after week because they're consistent. And I would say that no matter, what type of teacher you are, just, decide who you want to be, and hopefully that person is your authentic self. That would be my best piece of advice, is just be your authentic self, but be consistent so that students know this is what I'm getting. And you'll have the same people coming to your classes because they like it. And not everyone is going to like your classes, but what you told me, Karen, is that it doesn't matter what people say afterwards. What matters is how you feel after you teach your class. So those are the two things that I would leave everyone with.
Awesome. Well, I think that is really helpful and will help definitely somebody who's feeling on the fence. I talk to people who they're done with their training and they feel like I took this training and I'm just now starting to teach and don't feel like I'm cut out for it. So I think what you shared was definitely from the heart and will give people that support that they need to move forward. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much, Lauren, for doing this. I'm really glad we had a chance to to meet and to talk about this. And I was just so inspired to hear you share even more than when we had our first conversation. This will actually, today is Thursday, July 2nd. This will go live on Monday, actually. So in a couple of days, we'll post this up there for people to listen to. So thank you so much. I'm going to send you a copy of the recording when it's out on Monday morning. And I will talk to you later.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. If this episode got you thinking about a current challenge you're having in your classes or gave you ideas that connect to how you'd like to teach, I'd love to hear from you. I know a lot of teachers try to figure things out on their own by reading books, listening to podcast episodes, geez, even mine, or watching videos on social media. And while those things can be helpful, they don't actually solve the problem. What I've seen in my work with teachers is that problem solving and breakthroughs happen when you reach out for help and get one on one support, not in an hours based program, not in a group training, but in a setting where what's going on with you is the focus. If this sounds like the kind of support that would make a difference for you, send me a message on Instagram at Barebones Yoga or email me at karen@barebonesyoga.com. Just include the word podcast and tell me what's on your mind, your biggest challenge right now, or something you want to do next but aren't sure how to get started. I'll reply back with a couple of specific things you can try, and if it makes sense, we can hop on a call as well. You don't have to figure it out on your own.